Well, it is time for the SaaSification of the Edge panel. I see that there are a couple of y'all in here. Hopefully we'll get a few more, but this is going to be awesome. We are going to be talking about what the heck SaaSification of the Edge even means. We've got some great panelists, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves very briefly. They have clear instructions to not spend too long on this, and they're going to do it as part of defining what the heck we mean by SaaSification. And so I'm going to give it up first to Gary, because he's not on mute yet. And Gary, you want to define SaaSification and introduce yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Gary Mintchell. I'm an independent blogger, analyst, researcher person covering IT/OT in manufacturing and industrial market space. And SaaSification, it means something different to everybody. And for me, I take it back to about 2 decades worth of work in our industry, starting with the idea of machine to machine, where people could look into the machines they sold to a customer, for example, and maybe sell service. And now we have infrastructure and technology and permissions and all kinds of stuff where we can now do that more. And I'm starting to hear more and more about the ability to sell services in addition to, or rather than, products.
Got it. All right, Wes. Oh, and I should tell everyone we're not going to do it just yet, probably, but there's Q&A. Make sure you're in the session. And if you go to the chat, if you have questions, you can just like start typing them in there and have yourselves a little dialogue, and it'll be fun. Okay, sorry, Wes, go on.
Hi, so Wes Mukai. So I work for Rockwell Automation. So I head up platforms and architecture, looking at the edge topic and the data topic across what we call software and controls. Yeah, so when I think about SaaSification, I've been in multiple companies dealing with this issue. Cisco, SAP, larger companies, GE Transportation, that are either coming from a hardware product or a software product, enterprise software, licensed software, and trying to make this transition. Okay, what is SaaSification? So for me, there's a business side of it, and there's a technology and product side of it. And I really think you need to make sure, when I define it, it's processes. It could be business processes. It could be sales processes. There's products. There's technology, and then the people, right? And so if I think of SaaSification, everybody comes from a different starting point. But how do I become more like this? What we defined as, everyone always puts some of these, current generation SaaS applications, but everybody's on this different journey, whether it's across process, people, technology, and products. So I really see that it's a whole spectrum, and trying to move towards a lot of these models that have been proven. It doesn't always have to be the quintessential SaaS company, but it also can be somewhere in the middle. That's what I define as what SaaS is for me, and how do we become more like that? So. Okay,
so not just turning your hardware into software. Boom, there's people, there's processes, and more. All right, Stewart.
Hey, great to meet everybody. I'm Stewart McGrath, CEO and co-founder of Section. We're an Edge as a Service company, so we help organizations move their software to Edge, which has been actually a large part of SaaSification for a lot of our customers. And we definitely think a lot about SaaSification of software largely. We work in the application software space in the main. When I think about SaaSification, I think about the underlying drivers within the market, which are causing the organizations we work with to head to a SaaSification model. And that fundamentally is about making it easier for their customers to consume their product. And I think, Wes, you leaned into a few of those elements of consumption of the product. This is, as you said, it's not just about making the product itself a SaaS style product, but also thinking then about pricing, packaging, support models, update models, et cetera, et cetera. So there's SaaSification is a response to the underlying market demands for easier ways of consuming these products. And the organizations who are working with SaaSification or going through the SaaSification process are doing it successfully, where they deal with all of the components of SaaSification as opposed to just the product itself, or the technology, I should say.
Got it. All right. And Luciano?
So I'm Luciano Torres. I'm product owner at BOBST, where we are building a IoT connected platform. And I see SaaSification of I see basically BOBST increasing the types of different business models or ways to offer new services for our customers, enabled by edge and connectivity technology. So BOBST traditionally is a company that sells machines, package. We sell huge manufacturing machines to our customers. And we are moving to some of those other business models in this spectrum mentioned by Wes, starting from just offering a little bit more services on top of the machines enabled by this connectivity, up to models where we mix, we can charge by consumption of the machine, and eventually this is not something we do today, but we might think about, but eventually move to a full equipment as a service model enabled by technology. Right? So this is a whole range of different business models that we can think about in this industry.
Okay, I like it. And this gets into probably the meatiest part of the conversation, which is how do you build an organization that is going to have possibly many different business models, trying to run them all at once for your customers? Because if you think about, offering equipment as a service or just the hardware or some variation in between, an organization has to change a lot about themselves to meet those needs, right? You have to think about compensation strategies. You have to think about, your customers' budget cycles. There's a lot. So we're going to dig into all of that. It's going to be fun. Let's start with the most basic question is, do customers even want to buy this stuff as a service? I remember the transition to the cloud and everybody still wanted to hug their servers. And I'm curious what's happening in the industrial world. And I will start with Gary, because you have an overview, I think.
I have an overview, and it's an interesting question. It's a good way to go. I was, like I said, I go IT and OT, as they say in the vernacular. And I was at the Hewlett-Packard Enterprise Discover when they announced that they were going to be coming in as a service company. And it was pretty radical. And that meant a lot of changes, as you just mentioned, in the whole company. And so I was there and behind the scenes and able to ask a lot of questions. And then at this year's Discover, which was all virtual, they announced that the transition has gone well, that almost all customers, liked that change in their philosophy. And so that's moving their IT business along very well. On the other hand, on the OT side, things get kind of interesting. I was in a press analyst briefing with the chief technology officer of Emerson Automation, for example, and he's just kind of talking, and he said cloud as if, oh, cloud, that's just another thing. Well, that's revolutionary. And, some industrial people are so slow to adopt things, and we're so suspicious. And can we really send stuff off to some server somewhere? And when he said that, I thought, okay, this is interesting. And I know we have a Rockwell person on the panel, but about a month ago, I had a briefing with the team from Rockwell, and the actual briefing was on something else, but they managed to slip in as a service a couple of times. And I thought, okay, so I've got, Emerson, I've got Rockwell, and you can look at some other people in that space, and they're just slipping in this as a service thing. And so the idea is getting there. That doesn't mean everybody's adopting it, but it could mean that their major customers talking to them are saying, we're ready to start exploring this idea of opening up our skids or our machines or whatever to our suppliers so that the suppliers can provide us service. My analogy is if General Electric Aviation can sell thrust as a service, maybe, for example, Rockwell could sell something like quality as a service or uptime as a service or something like that. I always start taking the ball and running with it. But anyway, we must be getting there, because when those players start talking about it as if it's a real thing, it must be a real thing. So this is interesting, I think, and in the industrial sector, we could see some really interesting business models starting to crop up. And I'm sure Luciano has ideas on that too, because he's in the thick of that. But I think it's going to be very interesting.
Yeah. Okay. And Wes, why don't you tell us from Rockwell's perspective? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, just to follow up on Gary, I mean, it's interesting. Do customers, especially in the OT industrial space, where do we see it? Where do we see them in terms of that journey? And I think, Stewart, I think you brought up like sort of this simplicity, right? There's this sort of ease that goes around. I think they want that, right? Now, when I used to be in the enterprise IT space, we saw this flip to cloud actually fairly quickly. Boy, I don't want to do cloud. I don't want to do cloud and then the next month, guys, where's my cloud solutions, right? So I think in the industrial space, we're going to start to see that. And where I see this coming to, yes, they want simplicity, but I think it starts to show up a little bit in terms of things like control, right? So how do I manage, yes, I would love to have somebody like a Rockwell or industrial. Maybe you can help me manage the service offering or manage the equipment and maybe monetize it in a different way. But I want some semblance of control. Hey, maybe I want to be able to see what's going on. I want to be able, maybe there's some things I would love to run on the edge in that same platform you're offering to me. So there's some of that. And then there's also just sort of this, a sense of how are you going to manage the life cycle of things, right? Because the operational folks are like, it's great you're going to offer it as a service, but are you going to start updating things every quarter, every day? I'm more used to something in the half a year to a year. So the sense of, what's the right cadence? Companies you saw this in the IT space, right? They don't want updates every week. So having this ability to sort of offer up this management as a service of whether it's devices or edge, I think is a key capability that will help folks say, hey, you know what, we can find the right cadence of updating for you, Mr. Industrial Customer. So I think there's some of those actual, featuring can actually provide that sort of reduce some of the concerns, but also meet that simplicity need that Stewart was talking about.
Yeah, to me, the SaaSification is inevitable because the underlying principles of it's easier for you to work with makes sense. The only thing holding us back, and they're the same things that are holding people back from moving to cloud, as you were talking about, Wes, a few years ago, is to what level do I give up? Am I giving up control? What's the security story and what's the compliance story? Are those types of things, the barriers that we need to get over as part of the industry to help these organizations get the right level of performance, security, compliance, availability, and control over their SaaSify products, so that they can feel as though they can have their cake and eat it too, of all of the simplicity of SaaS, focus on my core business, but none of the downsides that they may perceive of a SaaS product.
Okay. And Luciano, you're trying to build this right now. So are your customers, are they actually accepting this? Do they want SaaS? Are they still kind of like lost? And if they are not interested in it, what are the characteristics of those that want it versus those that are still on the edge or on waiting?
So we have the whole range, right? That's the thing. So we have the small family business, which they only have one machine. They serve a few customers, and we have big corporations with hundreds of machines. So the needs of those customers are completely different. And so some of them, when we want to sell premium services, they don't even have a need to consume. They don't know how to consume these extra services, right? And on the other hand, there's some other companies that are starting their own digital transformation process, which for them having a connectivity service, having extra services is basically a need. They need to have it. There's also the matter of confidentiality. There are some customers that it's talk to them to connect their machine is just forbidden. It's never going to happen. They're so scared of having their data known by anyone else, or their competitors or whoever, that they say, no, there's no network on my shop floor. We have that as well. And so we have everything. And not to say that the small companies, they don't want digital, and the big ones, they do this. There's no correlation. We have everything everywhere. Also, when you talk about mixing equipment and services, I mean, depends a lot on how the companies they manage their accountability as well, right? Some of them they will want to own the equipment because that's how they work, right? There's no question. And for some others, that could be very, very interesting to have the agility to scale up and down their equipment depending on market needs. So again, we have the full spectrum, and we have to be able to offer something very personalized for each one of these customers. I mean, if this is what they want, we need to have a product that fills the needs, essentially.
That feels like a big organizational challenge, supporting multiple iterations, multiple business models. So we'll get to that in a second. But first, let's talk about the potential business models that y'all have seen. And I'll start with you, Wes, simply because maybe you've got some cool stuff. So there's obviously, like y'all said, a spectrum between here is a machine versus here is selling thrust or uptime. So can you talk about some of the business models that y'all are exploring or have?
Yeah, I think from a I think Luciano, you sort of talked about a little bit of that machine builder, OEM. I think we are looking at even at the small to medium size machine builder, not the big, the Pitney Bowes of the world. Let's see, where what's a service that these folks could offer up as a service? So can we enable a machine monitoring like service to this level of customer, and then the business model for that may feel like a pure pay by the drink kind of business model. But I think my concerns, and just as an industry wide, is can we make the cost of goods sold for that service viable, from whether it's the hardware and the software investment and the platforms we need to build those out. I think the industry as a whole has struggled with that over, the last 5 years, in a sense, right? That the business cases we've seen to build a business case and a business model are kind of these larger enterprise ones. And a lot of the SaaS world started at, the Salesforce of the world, right? You kind of hit the business unit or smaller, because of the economics, you could make it didn't have to be profitable initially, and it could, you could get a lot of VC funding to kind of do the expense up front with marketing. And I think on some of these edge areas, it's tougher, right, for companies like a Rockwell I'm not VC funded, so I need to put this investment in. How do I make the cost of goods sold work on a per device basis? So I think it's going to be still a struggle. All the past companies I've dealt with, as the cost, and we see more commoditization of some of the hardware software stacks. We see more commonality and more platform-like thinking. I think maybe we can start to create business models that are probably the more traditional SaaS ones that people are used to. But I think it's a struggle.
Are you trying to talk about the fact that, like, instead of buying a $10 million machine, I'm suddenly going to start paying, $1 million a year, or maybe $100,000 a month for something?
No, I'm not talking of the more like I think Gary was sort of mentioning like thrust as a service or for. No, I'm still thinking about, hey, I have assets out there that need to be, I want to either for preventative maintenance use cases, or how do I improve process optimization use cases? How can I overlay some analytic services to help them, right? Using edge equipment, and it's not sort of transforming the whole way around somebody, how they want to deliver that machine.
So it's an incremental business model. And
Yeah.
Stewart, do you want to talk about what you've seen maybe in this, or how the web software world has adapted to this kind of shift, and maybe there's takeaways for the hardware equipment guys?
Yeah, certainly. I think the good news in the web software world is it's significantly more portable in comparison to the hardware space, obviously. So providing that as a service has been something that's been done now for years and successfully. We're finding some interesting conversations happening with organisations who are coming in as point solution software providers, and they're losing business to SaaS offerings because of the ease of use. And in the software space, I think we've got over most of those kind of blockers that I think, Luciano, you were mentioning, Wes, you were mentioning, the compliance, the security, scalability, those control mechanisms in the software world has been largely overcome. But the business model structure for these point solution software providers is certainly a challenge. Whilst we can help them with the distribution of their software and the deployment model, the business model is still a challenge that people need to get through to understand how they can move from a multi-year license type fee to an ongoing per unit value structure for that particular for that particular product. And we've seen a few organisations work through that with some difficulty, and I think often the difficulty around those business models is finding the unit of value that makes sense for the customer, that can be compared to the unit of value, which was a 2-year license for that particular piece of software. I don't know if that's helpful.
No, that is helpful. That is true. That is where a lot of people
just one thing,
yeah.
It's funny, Stuart, because I actually see where, like in the cloud, right? If I think about, sort of, okay, everything was on-prem, went public cloud, now it's back to hybrid cloud. People have had that experience, and sometimes they're bringing it to some of these more IoT edge use cases too. It's like, oh, it's going to end up, I know the story, it's going to go towards cloud, but it's going to come back to somewhere in the hybrid, right? And then so you start to bring these experience of business model where, you know what, it's actually pretty expensive if I run everything in my public cloud, all my IT stuff. And so then they start to try to bring some of that, how do I think more smarter about how I leverage that? So I think we may see some of that overhang even in our IoT edge space too.
Yeah, the thing that's enabling that too, Wes, is we've gone, there's the classic pendulum swing, right? The centralized, decentralized, centralized, decentralized. But what we're seeing now is that, ultimately we all want our stuff to be running closer to end users for performance and scalability reasons. We all want our stuff to be easily consumed. So, SaaSification makes sense. But until probably the last 12 or 24 months, we haven't had, as a community, we haven't had the technologies that have allowed the consumers to consume that technology as a distributed product. So the software companies we work with say, well, I could deploy it in that cloud location. I can't really offer it to you in any other way, so it's going to be ineffectively an on-prem device. Whereas now they can access technologies like Section to distribute that globally, and all of a sudden there's an option to do what you're talking about, Wes, of having multi-cloud or hybrid cloud type situations.
Yeah, you kind of
Gary,
brought up an idea that in industrial software, they always sold, the business model was to sell seats, and it was very expensive to buy all the major, including Rockwell's, at the time, back in the day. And then you had a disruptive force come in that said, I can supply via the cloud, actually, or via the internet, and then I can give you the updates and everything without disrupting your old business, trying to run your own updates. And companies like Inductive Automation brought the price down of SCADA, for example. and so on. And other companies have rushed to follow in, and some MES companies at a higher level of software also are rushing into this cloud-based offering. And I've even seen PLM-based software, PTC, for example, and so on, looking at that sort of way to serve their product. And it's kind of like I'm giving you the product, but kind of like a service, and I'm serving it to you. I can drop the price to my end user considerably. And I've talked to, for example, a lot of Inductive's customers. Yeah, the product is good, but we really love, the pricing model and so on, and the way we can use it and upgradability. So yeah, Stewart, you kind of got me thinking about that different view of how I can provide my product, maybe not be as a service like Thrust as a service, but my product as a service, and make it easier for my customers to buy, to consume, to use. And then you brought up Edge. Well, the data transmission from, as the plant grows, and maybe I put it in one area of a plant, now I want to do the whole plant. Oh, now I want to do all my plants, and my bandwidth to the cloud is just going crazy. So then I use Edge. I say, oh, okay, I'm going to start doing a bunch of stuff on the edge, limiting how much I send to the cloud. And I see a lot of that. Innovation, this is all innovative, and it's really cool. There's a lot of stuff going on that I find just fascinating. And I think it'll be useful to solve business problems, which is where I really go to. It's not solving the technology problem, it's solving a business problem somewhere.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. And let's move from business models, some of the conversations we've had, to some of the organizational challenges associated with turning products into services, running things, and the SaaSification of stuff. And Luciano, you've been quiet for a while, so let's kick you off with some of the business challenges that y'all are discovering and trying to work with.
So yeah, as you mentioned, this organizationally.
You're on mute. It happened.
Okay. Can you hear me? I didn't click anything. Hello?
Hello, we've got you now.
All right, sorry. So yeah, the challenges, organizational challenges, they are huge, right? I mean, so when we at BOBST, we have separate groups, right? Machine group and services group. So they have different sales force. They have different sales cycles. They have a different way of working. Now when you start talking about mixing a bit both of them, having some services that are very linked to the equipment, and yeah, that can be quite complicated. Everything is different, right? The sales cycle is different. The way you approach a customer is different. The way you recognize revenue is different. So when you start talking more towards equipment as a service, we've been discussing some pilots, not full equipment as a service, but where the customers just pay a much smaller upfront fee. And then depending on how much they consume, like pay-as-you-go model, how much they consume, we charge for that. But I think a full equipment as a service, a company like us, we cannot do by ourselves alone. We need some partners, perhaps some financial institutions because it's really the challenge is too big from not only from a organizational sales process, but also financial, how you put all those machines, how do you keep all those machines on the balance sheet, right? So there's a big change on how your company works internally.
That's true, and there are actually financial institutions coming into this market to finance companies' construction of these machines, and then create like to securitize like the revenue coming off of them over time. It's crazy. Wes, you're all about processes and people. So let's talk about some of those challenges as you try to implement these new business models.
Yeah, so I found that, especially for larger companies, there's always this tendency when, the sales processes, support processes are kind of set up, whether it's for hardware models or for enterprise software style models where you have big license and maintenance fees. And sometimes breaking those cycles really takes, you could try to do this great consulting engagement to kind of re-engineer all these business processes and the finance processes. And I found in my career that, through larger acquisitions, so not the smaller SaaS type tuck-in things, but really large acquisitions of SaaS companies, they may be in different spaces, but if you start to get 2 or 3 of these larger ones in a big company, there begins to be more of the folks that have grown up and used business processes that are kind of similar, sales processes. Instead of traditional support, they do more CSA style, where they're advocates and adding customer success type of support. You can use large acquisitions to then have a model for folks to say, I need to change my big enterprise business process to that model, and it really helps break through that. And we're going that with we just did an acquisition of a company called Plex Manufacturing, which is in the SaaS MES space, manufacturing execution systems. And I look forward to that because it really is going to provide a good model for us around how do you, and it's just a continuation. We acquired another company called Fix doing the maintenance management thing. And with each one, you begin to understand better, this is how I need to account for and recognize revenue. This is how my salespeople get incentivized. This is how I should really provide support and then do upsell of our products. And I think that, to me, is a more lasting approach for these larger organizations to kind of affect that organizational change.
Wow, buy the change you want to be. Sounds expensive. Stuart, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I think if I was a company on the road to SaaSification, I would encourage that company to look at the SaaSification through a product lens. Because whilst the SaaSification may involve your core technology, whatever that may be, ultimately what you're doing is bringing to market a new product. And we've had customers walk in the door and say, we're missing our sales quota, or we have missed our sales quota because we're being beaten by that SaaSify customer, or the technical product team comes in and says, we've been ordered to move down a SaaS process. And the areas where we've seen most success from organizations going down the SaaSification route is where they look at it through a classic product discipline lens. And that product discipline lens, I think, touches on lots of the things that Wes and Luciano were just talking about, which is not just the pricing, not just the packaging, not just the sales enablement material, not just the sales compensation structure that needs to change, the support structure, the update structure, et cetera, and there's probably about 10 other product components that I should mention if I was right up to speed with it. But yeah, I think a really clear product lens over the top of a SaaSification process would help an organization get there faster and with more control.
Okay, and I want to take this over to the Q&A just briefly because we've only got 5 minutes left. But Ken Miller's asking, why is SaaS important for the edge? Networking, for example, is not SaaS. And I'm not 100% sure, Ken, where you're going with this, but I feel like maybe edge is actually more relevant for companies who want to become SaaSified. But does anyone have any thoughts or any takes there?
I'm happy to have a go at that one. Maybe I could reverse the question and say, why is edge important for SaaS? And I think the answer there is that if an organization is seeking to offer their product as SaaS, then invariably they'll be seeking to offer that product so it can be consumed from many different locations. If they offer it as a SaaS style product from one particular location, then you're only going to be able to service a very small geographic group without having performance issues. So effective distribution of applications for SaaS consumption means getting those applications into wider wider deployment frameworks so that it can be consumed where it needs to be consumed by the individual users that are consuming it at a time. So I think Edge is making SaaSification significantly easier where those companies are availing themselves of Edge as a service type solutions to get out there.
Okay. And then another question we have is Edge going to become more cloud-like, like totally pay as you go, which I think we've kind of talked about this quite a bit, but I would love any follow-ups or kind of clarification there, because I think that gets into the fact that we've got so many possible business models that, you could have it be totally cloud-like, or
we certainly think about this quite a lot, but I'm happy to pass that over to somebody else to have a go.
Wait, I think Wes looks like he might be ready to talk.
Well, I think in the concept of the edge elements and platforms technology are wrapped in a service, right? Because there's a cloud. If you take an analytics use case, right, there's always, hey, I train some analytics. I need data related to do some of that training. I create a model, and then I need to take that containerized model and move it to the edge. That could be wrapped in a whole service, right? So it's got a mix of some cloud elements to it, and also a managed edge that could run, can have a runtime. So I think will the actual edge element itself be monetized as a service business model, or is it encapsulated in a more end-to-end service where then you would, hey, yeah, I recognize this as a cloud to edge service, and that will come to me, be presented to me in a more SaaS-like business model. I think that's what the trend I see, as opposed to, technically there are things going on edge devices that are very cloud-like in terms of technology, but but the actual how it's offered to customers may not sell it may still buy a device, or maybe other ways. The more I don't know if you guys see differently.
Oh, I do.
Okay. Oh, cool.
Okay, let's argue. Go, Stewart.
So I see edge compute locations as computers. Cloud is just banks of computers in a more centralized location, and edge computers are computers that are in distributed spots. So there's no reason why we can't offer those computing locations as potential target locations for general purpose workload. Oh, yeah. And if we do that, then we're offering it as cloud. Now, there's mechanics to sit over the top of that, like the CPU RAM calculations. Do we charge on compute primitives? Do we charge on throughput, bandwidth, et cetera, And certainly there's opportunity here for us to leverage some pricing models and some intelligence in the process to work out where is the right spot across that edge compute continuum to run a customer's workload based on how valuable it is at any point in time. Should it run?
Yeah. And you've seen examples of that in the network, application management spaces, some of these other ones where they've been able to sort of monetize some of those.
It's a very IT way of thinking. I feel like the IT folks are there. The OT folks are probably like, what are you saying, man? What do you think? Luciano, Gary?
No. Well, interestingly enough, I just talked with the Rockwell people talking about the PLC as their edge compute device. And I said, boy, that's kind of weird, isn't it? And they explained to me why it makes a lot of sense. I like to think of things as a system. I'm kind of like with both of them. You've got an architecture and a system, and you've got compute here, and your storage here. And if you're trying to do, Wes brought up, I believe, a predictive maintenance, for example, as everybody's nirvana, and you can do that on the edge. You store the stuff, send up a time series database to the cloud, and everything works together. And if I were looking at marketing and how would I put an organization together and sell it, then I would probably put that together as a marketing SaaS system, if you will. I can imagine some ways I could sell that. So there are a lot of interesting models, and I think it's time to be creative.
All right. I'm going to give Luciano, since you're actually doing this, any final thoughts on this panel?
Just on this one, I think, as Stewart said, they should be kind of fluid, right? I mean, for the customer, they shouldn't care if it's what what is getting as a product is running on the edge, on the cloud, or anywhere in between, right? It's this. It's just a more flexibility that we have to run the workloads. Yeah.
Okay, well, we're getting the hook. Thank you guys, everyone.
Thanks,
Round of
Stacey.
applause and good job.
Thanks all.